Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road as we begin our series, Street Smarts from Proverbs. And to help me do that is my good friend, Kelly Bird. Kelly, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome, Mitch. Always good to see you.
And Judge Wendy Davis. Thank you, Judge.
Good to be here, Mitch.
And David P. Dean,
Street
the clean
comedian. Street comedian.
You're changing it?
Mm-hmm. For this episode.
Street comedian
Street
for Street
Smarts.
Smarts. I got it. That's excellent. I'm going to start by telling you a story. Susan and I were just married, and the way we did it in our collector car auction world, because we had an auction about every weekend somewhere in the country, we planned our vacation, our family vacation. So it would be my dad, my mom, my brother, Susan, who is a new addition to the family, and we were going to go to Lake Tahoe after our Reno vacation. And Susan and I decided to take this little boat by ourselves. And it's one of those, that the motor's back here and you steer it like that. And didn't you grow up on the lake? You're going to get a big kick out of all this. So did she. And my family, my brother, my mom, my dad, they got on the big boat with like 70 or 80 people. So the dock lady's getting us all set up. And she says, you know how to operate this thing? And I go, mm-hmm. Is what
Typical
I did.
man.
Yes, which I had never done.
Husband, I got this.
That's
I got
exactly
this.
what's going on. So, it's kind of complicated when you put that thing in motion and you're steering and it's kind of like it's backwards at first coming out of the dock. Well, I hit the side of the big boat.
Oh, no.
And I learned that the dock lady knew how to talk like a dock lady. And I'm telling you, if that first contact was like a love tap, what happened next was an act of terrorism. I thought I needed to give it a little more juice so I could get out of the way, and it's like it flew out of the water and bam, right into the big boat. And it's funny how you can recognize voices, because I heard my dad go, "Ah, what's that?" And the big boat, all 70-some people come over, and they're looking over the edge. And I hear my dad go, "That's Mitchell."
And you look to your wife and you say, do you love me yet?
Yeah.
Do you love me more?
Aren't you proud?
Yeah.
And she had grown up on the lake, and I could have just asked her. I actually was afraid. I thought I'd break the transmission to change it from going that way to going this way,
Sure.
forward or reverse, however you want to look at it. And that's really what I should have done, but I thought I could do
She stepped
that.
back and let you take the lead, huh?
She did. She did at that point. Our very first date, I'd take her to an opponent's basketball game. And I'd pick her up in Waterloo, and I'm going to go the back way to Angola. And 427 goes to Hamilton, but there's the road that you're on goes straight to Angola. We want to go to Angola. And it didn't feel right when I got to 427 and turned right to go to Hamilton. And about a mile down the road, I said, I think we should have gone straight back there. And she said, yeah, I think maybe that's what we should do. She had done it 1,000 times.
Right.
They went to Angola all the time on that road. I thought that's the way she would tell me when I drive. From that point on, I thought, man, I want to be married to this girl. She kind of handles that really well.
Nice.
So I tell all the girls, I said, look, when we were dating, she told me a mile into the trip that maybe I might be going the wrong way. I said, after dating for a couple years, she'd have told me right at the turn, no, you better turn back. I said, after a few more years of marriage, she tells me about 2 miles before we get there. Now, don't forget, go straight. So conflict is two objects attempting to occupy the same space at the same time, those two boats. And today we're going to look at Solomon's cycle of conflict, and it kind of sets the stage on why we need street smarts from Proverbs. Solomon had 2 encounters with God, and he gets wisdom because that's what he asked for when God says you can have anything you want. And then right out of the gate, one of the most unbelievable stories in all of Scripture takes place, and we're going to walk through that story. So we're going to first look at conflict, that it's positive or negative. And Judge, could you read 1 Kings 3:16-22?
Sure. Now, 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "My lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I had a baby while she was there with me. The third day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the two of us. During the night, the woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night, took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him on her breast and put her dead baby on my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son that I had born. The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours." But the first one said, "No, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine." So they argued before the king. Sounds like my courtroom.
That's what I'm going to ask you.
That's your life.
Is that your life?
That's your work.
Oh, yes, every day.
How do you discern that stuff? Like, who's telling the truth?
Well, that's the key. That is really the key. And that's why, like Solomon, I get up and pray for wisdom. And I cannot tell you that my prayer for wisdom, I know I'm where I'm supposed to be, or that God put me there, because I cannot tell you, sometimes I get off the bench and I thought, that was really wise of me. And I don't even know how I got there, but I think that, I deal with conflict every day, and two parties pointing fingers at each other. And typically there's a victim, like this one woman, right, who lost her child. And then, I guess there's two victims. One lost a child and the other one took theirs, right? And these kind of scenarios happen all the time. They happen all the time.
Exhausting.
And it can be exhausting. But, the Lord gives you strength. And like Solomon, I just continue to pray, be prepared. Obviously, I need to be prepared of the facts and the circumstances and the law that applies. But then you have to be a really good listener. You have to be a really good listener to both sides and then make a wise decision.
Wow.
Conflict can be either positive or negative. An example of positive conflict would be like lifting weights. But negative conflict always
Lifting potato chips.
Yes, exactly. It includes one sinful option, at least one. So conflict isn't all bad. It can be really, really good and positive. Can you think of a positive conflict or a negative conflict that's occurred in your life, or any conflict that's occurring now?
As you're talking about the boat story, if you ever spend any time at a boat ramp in the summertime, it is the greatest place to be to watch couples interact, because the husband is usually backing the truck down, and his wife, his bride, is in the boat, the driver's seat, and that's where I sit on a bench, and sometimes even just do that, just start, because the dialogue, the conversation starts off real sweet, and okay, you're gonna turn to the right, and then, did you want me to your right, to your left, bring it down, but it escalates quickly into, to your right, the tree, I am, you're like your mother, I hate your guts. And the kids are over on the pier going, I want grandma and grandpa, we want to go to grandma and grandpa.
I hate the
Mommy
lake.
and daddy's getting divorced, we are not. But it is the greatest place to watch friction between a couple and to see how it escalates so quickly, this conflict. But what's the ultimate goal? To put the boat in the... I came out of Disney World a couple months ago, and a family was walking out, and they're all counting children, counting heads. They've got $5,000 worth of ears and dresses and Mickey stuff. And one of the little girls, Angel, 2-3 years old, she... And mom yells at her, "We're at the happiest place on earth, knock it off." And I'm like, again, that is...
I witnessed the same exact thing on multiple occasions. I know exactly what you're saying. That happens all the time.
Tense. It's tense coming out of the park.
Uh-huh.
I was at Orlando Airport yesterday. Families are screaming and yelling and cussing, and they've all got their ears on, and they're...
So if you were in my shoes, and I deal with what you're talking about every day in my courtroom, because, I do criminal. I only do criminal felony. And I guarantee you. So how would you decision make? How would you resolve all of that?
That's
It's a lot of mess.
That's how
a big
God
mess.
has designed us all differently to do different jobs, because I'm the observer. I don't know how to fix it or take care of it or make it right, but give me a week and I'll go tell complete strangers what I just saw, and I'll embellish it and make it bigger than what it was. But I don't want to fix it.
That sounds like most lawyers in my courtroom.
I don't want to fix it. It's called job security, Wendy. I mean,
Oh, that's great.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Conflict, positive, negative, maybe in your own life?
Well, yeah, I think I know what you're asking. I know there are times with our kids where conflict arises, and to them it's the end of the world, and you know in your heart that it's actually a great opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are times when you can take a genuine conflict, a crisis, and you can see that if we walk through it a certain way, if we learn some things from it at a certain time, it can be a really positive experience.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear about it too. One of the biggest blessings that I have, obviously, what I do for a living involves a lot of hurt, involves a lot of people hurting other people, and so I have to make decisions. But I had an individual. He was, in fact, he's still. I have him under my jurisdiction, but his dad taught him how to shoot heroin at the age of 12. So at the age of 12, now he's sitting before me at the age of 20, and he said that he had put a needle in his arm his whole life. And his dad is since gone. He died of a heroin overdose, and his mom is incarcerated. I think I incarcerated his mom. And so, here he sits before me, but to your point, he said the hardest thing that I asked him to do was, I told him that I was going to release him if he followed strict court orders of services. It's very complicated when you release these individuals back to the community and try to get them clean, sober, and then living a pro-social lifestyle. Because this individual struggled, and he didn't. I mean, it was hard. It was hard, and he would continue to use. Sometimes I would continue to lock him up, and he'd come before me. But long story short, where he is now today, he just got through telling me that he said, at the beginning I didn't like you, Judge Davis. But you made decisions for me that were really, really hard. I mean, look at all the conflict he went through, right? It's like
Absolutely.
the kid thing all over again.
Yep.
And he said, but I'm making it. I'm working full time, and I've stayed clean and sober for, he's been sober now for almost 9 months, which is the most he's been for 8 years of his life. And so you look at that conflict. And, and during the time you have two lawyers, one saying, it's only a level 6 felony. It's a, low level felony. Just let him back out. There's a prosecutor standing over there saying, keep him incarcerated, So, but there's positive conflict, and then there's negative conflict. And I guess sometimes, like with your kids, the negative conflict, if handled appropriately, can lead to positive conflict.
Well, what you're both saying there is really interesting, and it's Solomon's cycle of conflict. Conflict, whether positive or negative, will always lead to a choice. That's the second stop in Solomon's cycle of conflict. Wendy, could you read 1 Kings 3, verses 23 to 25?
Yes. So back to the women. And the king said, this one says, my son is alive and your son is dead, while the other one says, no, your son is dead and my son is alive. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword to the king. He then gave an order, cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said to the king, please, Lord, please, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. And the other said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two. And the king gave his
I don't want to
word.
interrupt the judge, but I have to.
What did I tell you about that?
That was nicely done.
you're so polite.
If it pleased the court.
If it would please the court.
Don't interrupt me.
Can we stop at verse 25?
Yes.
Well, the choice is either wise or foolish, and this is really, do you call it the linchpin or the hinge point of the whole thing? And this is what you just described about the guy who struggled and his family who led him there to the heroin addiction. It presents us a choice, and the choice is either wise or foolish. In my boat, newly married, I made a foolish choice. I said, I know how to run this thing.
Yep.
And I found that left to ourselves, we're not very good at making wise choices instead of foolish ones. Left to ourselves, we're going to make foolish choices. Your whole life practically I'm not going to. It sounds like I'm going to say, your whole life you've made foolish choices.
I thought that's where you were going.
No, your
Sometimes
whole
we say
life.
too.
Your whole life, practically, have you've dealt with people who come to you and say, I've made a string of foolish choices. Get me out of this. What do I do now?
Yeah.
And I think that comes from a hardness of heart toward God, a progressive hardness of heart. How have choices affected your life?
I've made a lot of knee-jerk decisions in my life. I've got this, and again, it must be a man-woman thing, but when there's a cliff, let's just jump. Let's don't ask any questions. I'm willing to play without a net. Let's just walk. Let's walk the rope. And my wife, probably similar to yours, will let you take 2 or 3 steps. You slip, you hang, and then she says, I didn't think that was a good idea, but I let you go ahead. And so while you're out there hanging for life, why did you? She says, well, you wanted to do it so bad, and I didn't want to crush your dream, but that was your. Anytime a decision has blown up in my face, it's usually because I have just arbitrarily run with it rather than bring it before the throne of God and say, let's weigh this out here a little bit. But St. Betsy, as I call her, has come alongside and many times whispered, wait. Or let's just hang on. But there's been a time or two. 3 times, 28 years of marriage, where I just went ahead and went through with it. And it just, but I look at those as learning times, those moments where there was an explosion and you're like, what happened? But I remember those times. I look back and use that as learning for the future.
Beautiful. How about you, Kelly? You ever make a foolish choice?
I've made a lot of really bad decisions. I made a lot of sinful choices. In that light, I've also made a lot of them out of, I think a lot of times we make foolish choices because we almost feel like we're owed it because of what my dad did or what she did or how I've been mistreated or misunderstood. Just kind of the victim. I think a lot of victims who are genuinely victims. I'm not discounting that. But I think a lot of times people who play the victim make a lot of really bad decisions. I've made a lot of those.
Sometimes you can't even see
Yeah.
what bad decisions you're making.
Yep.
I'll tell you, the book that opened my eyes was Andy Stanley's The Principle of the Path, where he would counsel people who had just made horrific choices, bad choices for years, and now they're at the end of the road, and they would say to him, what do we do now? We're getting ready to file for bankruptcy, or our kids hate us, or the marriage is in shambles. Well, it didn't happen yesterday. It didn't happen a week ago. It was a series of just horrific choices that led him to that point.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've seen myself, that some choices I made, I was smart enough by the grace of God. I went down that path one time, and it was so horrific. I'm going to go back.
Well,
I want to go on the path
it
well
goes
lit.
into that thing that I tell my kids all the time: how you react to things in life define you. So,
Yeah.
if someone hurts you, how you react to that's going to define you. Are you going to be defined as God-loving? Are you going to play a victim? Or are you going to square your shoulders back and say, you know what? I'm not getting in a conflict with you, and I'm not going to, react in a way. Or, you could punch them, or you could, however, but how you react to hard, there's always going to be hard people in your life. There's always going to be a woman trying to steal your baby when hers dies, right?
Always.
I mean, as a metaphor.
Right.
Always.
And there's always something, and in my, try to be an elected official, work in government, when there's always someone looking to take something from you or drag you down because they want your position, or they want to make you look bad to make them look better. And that's a real, so how you react to that in that crisis moment, you can be a victim, or you can stand up and I'm going to take control of this, and God's light shines in me.
Yeah.
I coached with a guy for 10 years, and he grew up in the streets of a big city. And he told the girls one day that we coached, he said, you can either be a victor or a victim. Mm-hmm. And he used to teach them how to be victors. I think it's important to realize that we have a choice, that Solomon in our story had a choice. And the more we can learn about how to make wise choices, the better off life will be, because choice brings change. And that's our third stop on the 4 stops of Solomon's cycle of conflict. Judge Davis, could you please read 1 Kings 3:26, just one verse?
The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion, for her son said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the baby. Don't kill him."
So conflict can be positive or negative. It brings a choice, and that choice is wise or foolish. But then it brings change, and that change is going to reveal truth or pretense, or sometimes both. And that's what's going on in this change on what Solomon's doing. When my oldest daughter was probably just getting into teenage years, I said, I was disciplining her over something, and she was starting to do this thing as a pattern. And I said, just stop just a minute. She goes, what? I go, if you make a foolish choice, don't go down a road where you have to pretend that it was wise in order to defend your position. I said, I just don't want our relationship to be one where you pretend to defend. So we kind of talked through that, and she grew from it, and that really wasn't an issue after that.
Holy cow, can you come discipline my kids?
Well, it gets convicting. I walked away from that, and I thought, wait a minute. She probably learned that from me. I thought, man, I don't want to do that. It was like the Holy Spirit went whoosh. Because when you grow up in an auctioneer family, to win an argument, you make an emotional plea, you get louder, and then there.
Talk faster.
Yes, and you're done. You won.
And how many times, too, do you say something and someone's like, to my husband, and someone will say, did you just say, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And then you start to try to justify.
Yes.
You say black, and you're saying, no, I really meant red.
Yes.
Because you're so embarrassed, or you shouldn't have said black,
Yes.
And, so it's kind of what you're talking about, pretend to defend.
We justify our positions because we're arguing from positions. I remember, you remember Bill Muir probably. Bill was with Youth for Christ. He's a filmmaker, and I brought him in for about a day and a half before I came with you to volunteer full-time as a teaching pastor. And he tried to pull out everything that was in my heart and all the visions and stuff like that I had had. And we had the flip charts back in the day, and, doing all that. And then it's been about a day and a half. He says, okay, let's go talk to your wife. So we sit there in the kitchen, and we're closer than David and I are. And he hears us talk. He goes, just a minute, after hearing us talk for probably 5 minutes. He says, why do you talk as if you're miles away when you're only inches apart? And he didn't mean how close we were sitting to each other. And what he meant was we were saying exactly the same thing. She knew that I came from a workaholic background, and she thought I was going to do it all over again in ministry. And yet, in that time I did seminary, I started to value that which I had never known, and that was time with family and stuff like that. And so we're saying the exact same thing. We had the same values, but we were arguing from different positions.
Right.
So I think it's important to get to the truth. A wise choice will bring you to truth. A foolish choice, you're just going to probably pretend to defend. And as the woman in the story that Solomon judged. Last 2 verses, Judge 3:27 and 28.
But the other said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling. Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice.
Change affects community, and community will either be deepened or lessened. And here, conflict brought a choice, and it was wise. And it brought change, and it revealed truth and the truth of the lady's pretense. And it affected community by deepening community. They held the king in awe. It kind of rallied the troops, so to speak. But here's the problem. Community creates conflict, and that's why it's a cycle. so it's going to be never ending. And it really comes back to, do we want those deepened relationships? Do we want stronger community? It all comes back to, are we willing to make a wise choice in the heat of conflict and not say, and smack
Sometimes that
boat?
wise choice is just to look and say, oh man, I was wrong. I was wrong. You know, how's that feel coming out of my mouth? Not good. Doesn't taste good coming out of my mouth. You know?
20 years for nothing. Ugh. And as parents,
Yes.
especially those teen years, it's filled with conflict. You know your kids have come of age when they come back and say, remember that time, that one, and then your kids say, I don't know what I was thinking. That's refreshing to hear, because as a parent, you're like, there was conflict, there was a change that needed to be made, and then you realize that you don't do the I told you so, or you should have known, but you hear it, and it's refreshing.
We want to ask you today, what two objects are attempting to occupy the same space at the same time in your life? Define the conflict. And is it positive or negative? Next, what have your choices been? Have they been wise or have they been foolish? Could you now take the opportunity to make wise choices? How's the change been? What's been the consequences of your choices? Has it revealed truth or just more pretense, and like me, you're pretending to defend? And then community. Is it deepened or lessened? Have you experienced deeper relationships from wise choices, or not so good, fractured relationships from foolish choices? We'd invite you today to consider reading a chapter a day in Proverbs every day that corresponds with the date of the month. So you'll read through the whole book of Proverbs every month. You'll read it 12 times a year. I found that the more that you get into the Word, the more the Word will get into you, and this is the wisdom that you need to have street smarts from Proverbs. Solomon used 12 words that I've spent decades applying to my life and studying even further. And these 12 words can absolutely transform your life as you navigate through conflict to community.